I did just have my 2-year date of being clean and sober, and man, it's really great. And so man, I'm honored to get to speak to y'all and maybe give you some words of wisdom of how you can do this, how you can leave there and you can stay clean, you can stay sober, and life can look totally different for you the way you leave than when you came in. My name is Jeremy. The name of my book is going to be From Chains to Freedom, and because that's really the way I look at addiction is when I went into the first rehab, I mean, I was just in chains. I want to use a scripture. It's found in John 15:5, and it says, "I am the vine, you are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, will bring forth much fruit, and with me you can do nothing." So that was Jesus basically giving a description, saying that he's the vine, or he's the root, and that we're the branches. Just a little over 2 years ago, I would have never imagined in 100 years that I would be here talking to you guys. And so, like I said, it is an honor. In fact, you know, I sat in that very room that you're sitting in, and I probably sat in each and every one of those seats that you're sitting in. And man, when I was there, man, I was broken, I was addicted, I was ashamed, and I was really convinced that no matter how hard I tried, my life just wouldn't change. I'm going to tell you something, and you've probably never heard this said in a rehab, but I don't believe addiction's your biggest problem. So think about that for a minute, right? Because you're there, and I was there because of addiction. But I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying, because I know that addiction's real. The withdrawals are real, the cravings are real, and then the consequences that we have to go through sometimes because of the addiction, that's real too. But what I want to say is that the addiction isn't the root of your problems, it's actually the fruit. So addiction's the fruit and not the root. So in my own personal case, for years, I thought that cocaine was my problem. And while it was a problem, it was actually the fruit of a much bigger problem, because the root all started with what I believed in myself, you know. Before the addiction, really growing up as a kid, then going into the addiction, I always believed that I wasn't enough. I believed I was damaged. I believed I was rejected. I believed I was unlovable. I believed I had failed at too many things too many times. And what happened is I let every one of those lies become my identity. And my identity produced the fruit of what would become addiction. And I think when we look at addiction, a lot of times kind of what we have to do is get to the root of the problem and where that started. One of my favorite scriptures in the Bible, you know, it says that we have an enemy, and of course that enemy in the Bible is described as Satan or the devil, or you know, however you want to word that. But there's a scripture that says he comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and that like a lion he walks around looking for an opportunity to do that. And so when I share my story, I like to talk about that, because I believe that he was trying to destroy my life even before I was ever born. One of the things that happened is when my mom was pregnant with me, her and my dad was involved in a car accident. I was hit by a drunk driver, and that caused me to be born 7 weeks early. Now, 7 weeks early isn't that big of a deal now, but in 1974 it was a huge deal, and that's when I was born. And so even back then I believed that the enemy was trying to take me out. So addiction is basically a byproduct of who you believe that you are, right? So if you can remember, one of the things I want to say tonight, and if you're writing stuff down, just write down, everything you do flows from who you believe that you are. So if I believe I'm a failure, then I'm going to live like a failure. If I believe I'm hopeless, I'm going to stop trying. If I believe that I'll always be an addict, I'll continue making decisions that agree with that identity. Okay? So there's another scripture in the Bible that's really powerful, and it says, as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. So if in your heart you start believing all these lies about you and start believing about who your identity is and all those type of things, then the fruit that's going to be produced from that is going to be things like addiction. I want to say that, one of the things God does is he restores identity, and that's what I had to learn in my own life. Like, I had to get to the root of the addiction. And so, I think as humans, we kind of have, our behavior follows our identity. But I do believe that that through Jesus, that he can restore your identity. Jesus is the one that actually said, as you think in your heart, that's what you'll be. And so I believe that the enemy tries to use that tactic on us and try to make us think that our identity isn't what God says it is, but that it's in what things look like around us. And for years, what I really wanted in my life was peace. I went through abuse as a child. I went through trauma and things like that, and man, I searched for that peace. I searched for peace through sex and through drugs and alcohol, and basically anything that I felt that could numb the pain. But here's the thing, just like what you have found searching for the same thing, it doesn't work, right? And we all know that. And basically the addiction destroyed my whole life. There's a song probably y'all have heard from Disturbed that says, it's called The Sound of Silence. And there's a lyric in it that says, "Hello darkness, my old friend." And man, I want to tell you, that was kind of my motto for a number of years. I walked in darkness. I felt like darkness revolved around every area of my life, and it was always there. But I can tell you there's hope. And I believe that was found through finding the light. And for me, I found that light in Jesus Christ. And there's a scripture actually in John 8:12 that says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." So to give you just a little backstory, I had been pretty heavily involved in church, and then went through some things where I experienced some hurt, kind of walked away from my faith in a sense. And it was during that time that I got involved with drugs really heavy. In my teenage years, I'd had a pretty serious cocaine addiction, and then I went many years without messing with it. My dad died because of COVID. And then the week of his funeral, just a couple days before his funeral, I actually got really sick and found out I had COVID. And so I ended up missing my dad's funeral, and that was really what broke me. And so I had this idea that I would get a little $20 bag of cocaine and kill the pain for a little while, and then I would just carry on with life. And unfortunately, that $20 bag of cocaine turned into about a $300 a day habit. So, but what ended up happening is, at the very end of the addiction, I decided I didn't want to be alive anymore, and so I attempted to take my own life. But in Texas, if you have a suicide attempt and it doesn't work, you end up in a mental hospital. And so that's where I ended up. And they did an evaluation with me and ended up sending me I ended up in rehab. So I ended up in a rehab that is in College Station inside of Texas. And while I was there is when I had really a major supernatural encounter with Jesus. And it happened all by myself, all in a room. Just broken. And I really resonate with this scripture in John 8 about him being the light of the world, because in my darkest moment, in the most broken that I had ever been, I decided I would give God another shot. And really, I feel like he pursued me. Like, I mean, I feel like he walked into my room, and I can actually remember the room getting brighter. And so to talk about him being the light of the world, that makes a big deal to me. You know, at the height of my addiction, and you know, I've told people this, and I've seen people roll their eyes, but I'm pretty sure each and every one of you in this room can understand this, depending on what your DOC is. But there were nights, and usually they were mornings, watching the sun come up in a hotel room, chopping up cocaine, and hating myself and being so depressed that I was crying, and my tears were actually falling onto the plate where I was chopping up cocaine that I was fixing to put in my nose. And that's addiction, right? Like, you know, it feels like there's no hope, there's no way out. And so, you know, even at that time, I thought that my biggest problem was cocaine, but that wasn't my biggest problem. My biggest problem was identity and not understanding who I was. And so during that time at the first rehab is where I really, I gave my life to Christ. I decided I was going to go all in. I decided I was going to work the program, and that I was just going to get with it. And, you know, I asked God, I was like, man, if you can fix my life, you know, I'll serve you for the rest of my life, because right now my life is tore up from the floor up. And while I was there, I came across this really cool scripture. You might want to write it down if you have a pen, because I think it's great for people who have substance abuse. But it's in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. And it says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, and it's the evidence of things not seen. And that word substance obviously got my attention because of the substance abuse. Because for years, really my whole life, my life had been revolved around substances, right? And so because I was always looking how to fix something inside of me that was broken, substances seemed like, you know, the right thing. So I had a faith, you know, my faith wasn't in a religion or was in God. My faith was in cocaine. And I remember saying one time, and I don't know if any of you in there had dealt with a cocaine addiction, but I remember telling someone one time that cocaine calmed me down. And if you know anything about cocaine, you would know just how ridiculous that is. But you know, I believed cocaine could numb my pain and give me peace. But what I ended up doing was I traded one substance for another, and I traded cocaine for the substance of faith. And that's what made like the biggest difference. One substance demanded more and then gave me less. One substance led me into bondage, but another substance, the substance of my faith, is what brought me healing. It brought me clarity, brought me restoration, and at the end of the day, it brought me freedom. You know, and when I look at addiction, you know, I look at it like if you have a bathtub full of water, you know, and you pull the plug on it, it drains pretty slow, and everything kind of seems to happen fast until you get right there at the end, and then all of a sudden it seems like it speeds up and it goes down the drain really quick. And that's really how I look at addiction, because I think that's the way addiction worked for me. You know, for a long time I liked to call myself you know, an addict but that can maintain. I mean, I was able to keep my job and you know, put on a mask and kind of fake it. Recovery wasn't, as I started to experience recovery more, recovery wasn't just removing a substance. It was actually about removing an old identity. And then I want to leave you with another scripture, but it basically says, apart from me, you can do nothing. And so when I read that, you know, it was, I really took hold of Jesus saying, apart from me, you can do nothing, with the 12 steps, you know, that we learn in recovery. And with, I'm sure if I asked you to raise your hand tonight in recovery, how many of us said, oh, I got this, and then for me, I was riding into the hood at 3 a.m., with cops everywhere and everything else just so I could get high, You've probably said this just like I did. Well, this is my last time, How many times have we said that, right? Or what about, I can quit anytime I want? I think that's the biggest lie that an addict ever says, right? Whether it's drugs or alcohol or sex addiction or violence or whatever it is, well, I can quit when I want, but I think it's really cool that 2,000 years before the AA program was even written, Jesus said, without me, you can do nothing. And then if we look at step one, right, we all know step one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol or drugs, that our lives had become unmanageable. And so I think it lines up really well with, from my story that on our own, we can't do it. We can do the 12 steps and, we can have a support system, and man, all those things are great and they work. But at the end of the day, I found that I couldn't do it without having God actively involved in my life. And when you're an addict, you're powerless over your addiction. That's why I sat right where you're sitting, and that's why you're sitting now. I believe that the Jesus saying, "Without me, you can do nothing." That kind of points us to the real, true recovery and real, true freedom. Starts when we realize that we can't do it on our own, and I couldn't get freedom dependent on myself. It started for me with dependent on God. And when I look at addiction, man, I hurt people, I damaged relationships, I disappointed the people that I loved the most. But the amazing thing is God didn't throw me away. Even when I tried to kill myself, He kept me alive. I want to stress to you that here's the thing. I believe that freedom is real and that it can be attained. And I've mentioned that I found that comes through Jesus. The key is you don't have to be an addict anymore. And I think that if you can learn that it all goes back to the root of the identity of who you actually are, not what you've been told that you are, not who you have said that you are. So it's believing that you're more than what you've said you are. You're way more than what you've even the fruit that you've produced. But Jesus was different. He loved people with and expected nothing in return other than following Him and being devoted to Him. And so just let me say this. Don't find people that just want to see you recover and be clean just so that you're sober. The best advice I could give you when it comes to this is that find people that'll help point you towards Jesus. I want to talk just a little bit about what my life looks like now, because I spent so many years saying I'm an addict, I'm a failure, I'm broken, I'm hopeless. Today my life, it sounds completely different, because I walk around saying things like I'm forgiven, I'm loved, I'm chosen, I'm a son of God, I'm not an addict, I'm free. I believe that our behavior follows our identity. So you decide, who am I going to identify with? Am I going to identify with my past or my regrets or my hurt or my shame? Or am I going to identify with who I am now?